It was a bright, sunny afternoon, and Emily Dawson was out for her usual walk. She tapped her white cane gently on the ground as she walked slowly along the busy street. Her guide dog, Max, walked right beside her. Max wasn't just any dog. He was special. He had been trained for some of the toughest and most dangerous jobs there are. He had been a Navy SEAL dog, protecting soldiers on missions. But to most people, Max just looked like a regular service dog, helping a blind person walk. And Emily? Well, she looked like a normal woman, just another person walking down the street. The only difference was that she couldn't see the world around her. Her eyes were like two closed doors, and she used her cane to help her find her way. People sometimes stared at her or whispered when she passed by, but Emily didn't mind. She had gotten used to it. But today? Today was different. Something in the air felt strange. It was hard to explain, but Emily felt it deep inside. She didn't know why, but she had a feeling that today would not be like any other day. She kept walking, her cane tapping rhythmically on the sidewalk. Max's paws made soft sounds as they moved together. Emily had always trusted Max. He was more than just a dog. He was her eyes when she couldn't see, and he had kept her safe for many years. Even though Emily couldn't see the faces of the people around her, she could tell they were looking at her. She could feel their eyes on her, and sometimes, she could hear the whispers. "Look at the blind lady," they would say. Or, "Poor thing, she can't see." But Emily had learned to block out those whispers. She didn't need anyone's pity. She was strong, and she didn't let the looks or the gossip bother her anymore. But today, as she walked down the street with Max, there was something different about the way people were acting. The usual whispers weren't there. Instead, there was an odd silence. And Emily could feel it. The air felt thick and heavy. She couldn't see it, but something was coming. She didn't know what it was, but she felt it in her bones. It was almost like the calm before a storm. And little did she know, this would be the day when everything changed for her. This quiet walk would turn into an adventure, a challenge, something she never expected. Something that would make her life collide with danger, and maybe even with people who didn't understand the strength she had. But before all of that, before the day turned upside down, Emily had no idea what was coming her way. She just kept walking, trusting Max to lead her and guide her, as he always did. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below. I'd love to hear where you're tuning in from. And while Emily walked, unaware of what was about to happen, the world around her was already starting to change. As Emily walked closer to the corner, she heard the loud roar of motorcycle engines nearby. The sound was deep and powerful, like thunder rumbling in the sky. The bikes were noisy and powerful, making sure everyone could hear them. Emily had seen the bikers before, sitting outside the local diner, talking and laughing with each other. But today was different. The bikers didn't seem like they were just hanging out. No, today they were acting strange, restless and full of energy. They were looking around, checking people out, and their eyes seemed to focus on her. Emily couldn't see them, but she could feel their eyes on her. She had learned to pick up on things like that, even though she couldn't see what was going on around her. She knew what it felt like when people looked at her because she was blind. Sometimes they looked with curiosity, sometimes with pity. Other times, they just stared because they didn't understand her. Emily was used to it. But today, these bikers weren't just staring. There was something different about the way they were looking at her. Suddenly, one of the bikers, a tall man with tattoos on his arms and a leather jacket, shouted at her from behind. His voice was loud, rough, and a little mean. "Hey, lady! Watch where you're walking," he yelled, sneering at her. His voice was mocking, almost like he was trying to make fun of her. Emily's grip on her cane tightened, and she felt a spark of anger start to grow inside her. She had dealt with rude people before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a passing comment. It was mean, and it wasn't just about her blindness. They were mocking her. And they were doing it because they thought they could. Emily's face tightened. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She knew better than to respond to people who were trying to get under her skin. But inside, she could feel her heart beat faster. It wasn't the first time someone had been rude to her, but it felt different today. The bikers weren't just teasing her, they were looking at her like she was an easy target. Like she was someone they could push around. Like they could say whatever they wanted, and no one would stop them. And that made Emily feel small. It made her feel helpless, even though she knew she wasn't. Max, however, wasn't feeling helpless at all. Emily could feel the difference in his body. Max, her guide dog, was standing tall beside her, his body tense and alert. Max was more than just a guide dog. He had been trained to protect, and he could sense trouble long before Emily could even hear it. When the biker shouted at Emily, Max's ears perked up. He stood beside her, his body stiff, and his nose sniffed the air, sensing the change in the atmosphere. He didn't like what was happening. He could feel the tension in the air, and he knew that these bikers were trouble. Emily may not have been able to see them, but Max could sense their intentions. He wasn't just a dog who helped Emily find her way. Max had been trained to protect her from danger. He had been through countless training missions as a Navy SEAL dog, and he knew how to handle situations like this. The bikers didn't know this, of course. They didn't know that Max wasn't just any dog. They didn't know that Emily's guide dog was a retired Navy SEAL K9, trained to be strong and smart. They didn't know that Max had been trained to protect in ways they couldn't even imagine. As the biker started to walk toward Emily, smirking with that same nasty look on his face, Max stayed perfectly still. He wasn't going to let this man get any closer to Emily. Max's muscles were tight, his body firm like a rock. His tail was still, and his eyes were locked on the biker, waiting for the next move. Max knew what to do. He didn't need to be told. The biker didn't seem to notice Max's warning. He was too busy laughing and making fun of Emily. But the more he came closer, the more he felt the shift in the air. Max was ready. He wasn't just standing there for no reason. Emily had learned to trust Max completely. She had always known that Max would protect her if something went wrong, and today, she needed that protection more than ever. She could feel Max's strength beside her, and she knew that no matter what, he would keep her safe. The biker stepped even closer, thinking that Emily wouldn't be able to do anything. He was getting cocky, his smirk still on his face. But then, without warning, Max moved. He didn't need to bark or make a sound. Max's quick, silent movements were enough to make the biker stop in his tracks. The biker's expression shifted from confident to surprised. The biker hadn't seen it coming. Max moved so quickly that it took the biker by surprise. Max didn't attack, he didn't need to. Max's presence alone was enough to make the biker take a step back. The biker, who had thought it would be easy to mock a blind woman and her dog, was now looking at something much bigger than he expected. Max wasn't just a guide dog. He was a trained protector, and he knew exactly how to handle this situation. Emily didn't know exactly what was happening. She couldn't see the biker's shocked expression, but she could feel the change in the air. She could feel Max's power and confidence, and she knew that whatever happened next, they would be okay. She didn't need to worry. The biker, however, didn't know what to think. He had come so close to mocking Emily and her dog, but now, facing Max, he wasn't so sure. He had made a big mistake. And he was about to learn the hard way that not everyone is what they seem. Max wasn't just any dog. And Emily? She wasn't someone you could push around. Days passed after the first encounter with the bikers, but the problem didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. Emily couldn't ignore it anymore. Every time she left the house, it felt like the bikers were there, watching her. Their loud motorcycles would rumble, and she would feel their eyes on her. It was like they were always waiting for her, always looking for another chance to make her feel small. It made her heart beat faster every time she heard the sound of those engines. At first, the bikers had seemed like they were just trying to make fun of her because she was blind. They would shout rude things at her, and their taunts were mean. But after a while, Emily started to notice something strange. The bikers weren't just making fun of her blindness anymore. It was like they were focused on something else, something about her, or maybe something about Max. She couldn't put her finger on it, but she could feel it. Max, her guide dog, had always been calm and steady. He had helped her navigate the world for years without hesitation. But lately, something in the air seemed to be bothering him. Every day, he grew more protective, more tense. He could sense something that Emily couldn't. And she started to realize that Max wasn't just protecting her from the bikers. He was sensing danger in a way that only a trained dog could. Max was a retired Navy SEAL dog, and he had been through many tough situations. He had seen the world in ways that Emily never could. And now, Max seemed to know that something wasn't right. Emily tried to stay calm, even when she could feel the bikers getting closer. She didn't want to show fear. She didn't want to give them the satisfaction of seeing that they were getting to her. So, every time she left the house, she walked carefully, her cane tapping on the ground, Max by her side. She kept her movements steady, like she always had, even when she felt the tension growing. But each day, the bikers seemed more and more focused on her. Their taunts were sharper, their words more cruel. It was no longer about her blindness, but about something else. Something Emily couldn't figure out. Why were they so focused on her? And why were they acting like this? Emily had been blind for most of her life. She had learned to live with it. But these bikers? They didn't seem to care about her blindness at all. They seemed more interested in something else. Something about her or about Max. One day, when Emily and Max were walking down the street, she heard the rumbling sound of motorcycles in the distance. She had learned to recognize the sound, and her heart skipped a beat. They were coming. The bikers were coming. She tried to stay calm, but she could feel the tension building. Max's body was stiff, his muscles tight. He was ready. He was always ready. Emily didn't know why the bikers had been picking on her lately, but she knew that Max wouldn't let anything happen to her. She trusted him with her life. And that day, things were about to change. The bikers got closer, and Emily could hear the engines grow louder. She could feel their presence all around her, like they were closing in. Max's steps were steady, but she could feel his body tense, like he was waiting for something to happen. Then, out of nowhere, one of the bikers suddenly grabbed her arm. He jerked it hard, pulling her off balance. Emily didn't know what to do. She tried to pull away, but the biker's grip was strong. He laughed, a loud, mocking sound. Emily's heart raced, and she felt panic begin to rise in her chest. This wasn't just a taunt anymore. This wasn't just some rude comment. This was an attack. But Max wasn't going to let that happen. Emily didn't have to say a word. Max's instincts kicked in the moment the biker grabbed her. He didn't hesitate. With one swift movement, Max leapt into action. His body was a blur of strength and speed, his training kicking in like it was second nature. The biker didn't see it coming. Max was fast. Too fast. In one smooth motion, Max's teeth were bared, and the biker was forced to let go of Emily's arm. The biker stumbled back, surprised by the power of the dog. Max's growls were low and threatening, and his eyes never left the biker. Max wasn't just protecting Emily anymore. He was sending a message. Emily didn't know exactly what happened, but she could feel the change in the air. The biker had let go of her, and she could feel Max standing tall beside her, like a wall of strength. She could feel the power in Max's body, and she knew that the biker had made a big mistake. The biker took a step back, eyes wide. He had never expected this. He had underestimated Max, just like everyone else did. But Max wasn't just a dog. Max had been trained for moments like this. And now, the bikers were about to learn a hard lesson. Emily stood still, trying to catch her breath. Her heart was racing, but she felt safe. She trusted Max. She knew he would protect her. And now, it wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about showing the bikers that they couldn't just push her around. Max wasn't going to let them bully her. The bikers looked at each other, unsure of what to do. They had crossed a line. They had made a mistake. And now, they were faced with a dog who wasn't afraid to defend what was his. Max wasn't just Emily's guide dog. He was her protector. And today, he had made that clear. The bikers didn't know what to do next. They had been expecting a woman they could make fun of. They had been expecting someone they could pick on. But now, they were looking at something they hadn't expected: a trained warrior of a dog, standing between them and Emily, ready to fight if necessary. One of the bikers took a step back, his face pale. He had learned the hard way that Max wasn't like any other dog. And Emily? She wasn't someone you could mess with either. She may have been blind, but she wasn't weak. She wasn't a victim. And with Max by her side, no one would ever make her feel small again. As the bikers backed off, Max stayed alert, his body still tense. He had made his point, and he wasn't about to let anyone get too close again. The bikers had learned that Emily wasn't someone they could push around. And Max? Max was ready to protect her, no matter what. Emily finally took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the situation lift. She could feel Max standing strong next to her. She didn't need to see him to know he was there, always watching, always ready. And that, more than anything, made her feel safe. But something had changed. The bikers weren't done. They might have backed off today, but Emily knew this wouldn't be the last time they would try to pick on her. They had learned something today, but they still hadn't learned everything. And Emily had a feeling that the next time, things would be even more intense. The next day was different. Very different. Emily had planned to just go about her usual routine. The sun was bright, and the streets were as busy as usual. But when she and Max stepped outside that morning, something felt off. The air was thick with tension, like something big was going to happen. She had a feeling in her gut that today would not be the same. Max, walking beside her, seemed to share that feeling. He was more alert than usual, his nose twitching, his eyes scanning every movement around them. Emily knew Max better than anyone. She could feel the change in his steps. He was on high alert. As they walked down the sidewalk, Emily's footsteps clicked steadily along, the sound of her cane tapping rhythmically with each step. It was when they reached the corner, just ahead of the diner, that Emily saw them. The bikers. They were sitting at the same table as the day before, their loud laughter filling the air as they smoked and joked. But this time, something was different. Emily wasn't going to just walk past them like she had done in the past. No, this time, she was going to face them head-on. The bikers hadn't noticed Emily and Max approaching. They were too busy laughing and talking, their loud voices echoing through the street. Emily took a deep breath, gathering her strength. She was ready. Max was ready. And this was the moment she had been waiting for. "Let's go, Max," she said, her voice steady. Max responded immediately, his body straightening as they made their way toward the diner. He wasn't hesitant. He was confident, like he knew exactly what was coming. As they reached the door, Emily stepped inside first, with Max right beside her. The bell above the door jingled, and the entire diner went silent for a split second. All eyes turned toward her, and the room seemed to hold its breath. The bikers stared at Emily in shock, not expecting her to walk into their space. One of the bikers, the same one who had mocked her the day before, stood up slowly, a sneer spreading across his face. He crossed his arms over his chest and looked Emily up and down. "Well, look what we have here," he said, his voice loud and mocking. The blind lady and her dog. What do you think you're doing, huh? The other bikers chuckled, not taking her seriously. They probably thought this was going to be another one of those moments where she just walked away quietly. But today, that wasn't going to happen. Emily didn't back down. She stood tall, her cane resting in front of her, and she could feel the eyes of everyone in the diner on her. Her heart was calm, even though she could hear the pounding of her own thoughts. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. I'm not just some blind woman, Emily said, her voice clear and strong. And he's not just some dog. The biker who had spoken laughed, his cruel laugh echoing in the quiet room. Oh really, he said, his grin spreading wider. What's your dog gonna do? You think we were scared of your little lap dog? Emily didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. She stood her ground. She knew the power of her words, and she knew the truth of what was about to happen. No, she said quietly. You should be scared. You just don't know it yet. And with that, she snapped her fingers. A simple motion, a quick sound, but one that changed everything. Max, standing right beside her, tensed up immediately. His body shifted, his muscles tight with focus. Emily could feel the change in him, the energy that ran through his every nerve. He was ready. The biker who had spoken froze. His face drained of color, and his smirk faded away as he realized something: he had underestimated Max. And he was about to learn the hard way that Max wasn't just a guide dog. Max wasn't just there to help Emily cross streets or find doors. Max had a much bigger purpose. Max had been trained. Trained in ways that these bikers could never understand. A few moments passed in complete silence. The tension in the air was so thick that it felt like everyone in the diner was holding their breath. And then, in one swift motion, Max lunged forward. It wasn't an attack. No, it wasn't violence. It was more like a warning. Max didn't touch the biker, but the sheer power in his movement made the biker step back, his hands raised in the air. The other bikers followed, their faces pale as they saw the intensity in Max's eyes. The biker who had been so sure of himself earlier now seemed unsure. He stumbled back a step, his voice faltering. I didn't know, he muttered, his voice weak. The rest of the bikers were silent. Their eyes were wide, and none of them moved. They had seen something they hadn't expected: a dog who wasn't just a pet, a dog who wasn't just a guide dog. Max had been trained for things they could never imagine. He was a retired Navy SEAL K-9, trained in the most dangerous missions, and now, he was standing in front of them, a protector, a warrior. And the bikers knew that they had made a huge mistake. Emily's heart was steady as she stood there, watching the bikers back off. She didn't need to raise her voice. She didn't need to shout. The message was clear. Max was not just any dog. He was a trained fighter, a soldier, a protector. And he wasn't going to let anyone hurt Emily, not these bikers, not anyone. As the biker slowly backed away, his face pale and shaking, Emily couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Max had protected her in ways that no one could have expected, and he had shown the bikers what happens when you mess with the wrong person. Max stayed at her side, his eyes never leaving the bikers as they shuffled away, unsure of what to do. The power dynamic had shifted. The bikers were no longer in control. They had thought they could bully Emily. They had thought they could make fun of her. But now, they knew better. Emily turned and walked out of the diner, Max following close behind. The door jingled as it closed behind them, and the sounds of the bikers' nervous muttering faded into the distance. Outside, the world felt different. The streets felt safer. And Emily knew that no matter what happened, she had Max by her side. And that made all the difference. She had faced her fears. She had stood up for herself. And now, the bikers would never mess with her again. They had learned that you can't judge someone by their appearance. And they had learned that sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the one you should never underestimate. The silence in the diner was deafening. No one said a word. The only sounds were the faint hum of the air conditioning and the soft shuffle of feet. The biker who had taunted Emily stood frozen, his face pale and his body trembling slightly. He had never expected this. Never in his wildest dreams had he thought that the blind woman and her dog would be the ones to bring him to his knees. He had thought he could scare them, that they were weak, that they were easy targets. But now, he realized just how wrong he had been. His bravado, his confidence had evaporated in an instant, like mist in the morning sun. He had been so sure of himself just moments ago. But now, with Max standing tall at Emily's side, a calm and powerful protector, he felt small. Small and ashamed. The rest of the gang had scattered, one by one, realizing that the situation had taken a turn they never expected. They had thought they could make fun of Emily, that they could intimidate her because she was blind and, in their eyes, weak. But Max had shown them that they were the ones who were weak. Max stood at attention, his gaze fixed on the biker with a steady intensity. Emily could feel the power radiating from him, and it gave her strength. She was no longer afraid. Max wasn't just her guide dog. He wasn't just a companion. He was her protector, trained for a life she could only imagine, and now, he was showing the bikers that there were consequences for their actions. "Get out," Emily said, her voice calm but firm, like a judge handing down a sentence. "You're not welcome here." Her words rang out through the diner like a clear bell, sharp and direct. The biker's expression faltered. He had never been spoken to like that before. He was used to being the one who intimidated people, the one who made others back down. But Emily wasn't like anyone he had met before. And neither was Max. The biker's lips parted, but no words came out. He took a slow step backward, as if unsure of what to do. His body language said it all: he was defeated. He knew that there was no way he could win this fight. Not with Emily standing her ground, not with Max watching his every move. The power dynamic had shifted completely. He was no longer the one in control. He was no longer the one making the rules. The other bikers, who had been watching from the sidelines, started to look uneasy. They had been so sure of themselves when they had first seen Emily. They had assumed that she would just keep walking, that she would keep avoiding them like she had done before. But now they saw something different. They saw Emily standing tall, confident, unafraid. They saw Max, a dog they had thought was nothing more than a simple guide dog, showing them the true meaning of strength. And they realized, in that moment, that they had made a mistake. One by one, the other bikers began to leave. They didn't say anything. They didn't protest. They just quietly turned and walked out of the diner, their heads down, their footsteps heavy with the weight of their shame. They knew they had crossed a line. They knew they had messed with the wrong people. And now, they were paying the price for it. The one biker who had started it all, the one who had mocked Emily and thought he could get away with it, was left standing alone. He looked around, as if waiting for someone to come to his rescue. But no one did. The other bikers had already made their exit, leaving him to face the consequences of his actions alone. And in that moment, he realized something. He realized that he wasn't just dealing with a blind woman and her dog. He was dealing with someone who had a strength that went far beyond what he had ever imagined. Emily wasn't just a victim. She wasn't someone to be looked down upon. And Max? Max wasn't just a dog. He was a trained warrior, a protector, and someone who could bring down an entire group of bikers without even lifting a finger. They had underestimated them, and now they were paying the price. Emily took a deep breath, her calm presence making the atmosphere even more powerful. She could feel the weight of the situation. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the diner on her. And in that moment, she knew that the world was watching. She had just stood up for herself. She had just shown everyone what it meant to be strong, to be confident, and to never back down, no matter the odds. The biker who had taunted her looked at her one last time, his eyes filled with fear and regret. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but nothing came out. He knew that he had already lost. There was nothing left for him to say. He had been defeated, not by violence, but by the strength of Emily's resolve and the power of Max's protection. Without another word, he turned and walked out of the diner, leaving behind a trail of shame. As the door closed behind him, Emily exhaled a slow, steady breath. She had done it. She had faced the bikers head-on, and she had come out victorious. She hadn't needed to fight. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. She had simply stood her ground, with Max by her side, and let her actions speak for themselves. And the world had taken notice. The diner was quiet for a moment. No one spoke. But the atmosphere had changed. The tension that had hung in the air just moments before was gone. The other diners, who had watched everything unfold, began to murmur among themselves. They had seen what had happened. They had seen Emily stand up for herself. And they had seen the power of Max, the retired Navy SEAL K-9, who had protected her when she needed it most. Some of them even nodded in approval, their faces filled with respect. They had witnessed an important moment, a moment where someone had refused to let others walk all over them. A moment where someone had stood up, not just for themselves, but for everyone who had ever been judged or underestimated. Emily and Max walked to the counter, their steps steady and confident. They were no longer the quiet, invisible pair who people felt sorry for. They were a force to be reckoned with. They had shown everyone that sometimes, the most unlikely people are the ones who have the most strength. And sometimes, the ones who seem the weakest are the ones who have the power to change everything. As Emily sat down at the counter, she smiled to herself. She didn't need the approval of the bikers or anyone else. She had Max. And that was all that mattered. Together, they had faced down bullies and shown the world that they weren't to be messed with. They had earned the respect they deserved. And that respect would follow them from that day forward. Max sat beside her, his eyes calm, but his posture still strong. He wasn't just a dog. He was her hero. And together, they had proved that no one could take that away from them. The air outside the diner was fresh, cool, and filled with the kind of peace that only followed a storm. Emily and Max walked together, side by side, down the street. They didn't need to say much. They didn't have to. They had already spoken with their actions. As they walked, Emily thought about the day that had just passed. It was a day that had started like any other. A day that, in the beginning, seemed like it was going to be just another walk, just another quiet moment in her life. But now, it was different. It was special. It was a day she would never forget. And the world around her would never forget either. Max trotted beside her, calm and steady as always. But there was something different about him now. It wasn't just that he had protected her when the bikers tried to intimidate her. It was that he had done more than that. He had shown the world what true strength looked like. He had shown them that strength wasn't always about how big you were, or how loud you could shout. Sometimes, the strongest people are the quiet ones. The ones who don't have to prove anything. Max was a perfect example of that. Emily smiled down at him, feeling a warmth in her heart. She had always known Max was special. She had always known he was more than just a guide dog. But today, the world had seen it too. Today, they had learned that Max wasn't just her guide dog. He was a retired Navy SEAL K-9, trained for the toughest, most dangerous missions. He wasn't a dog to be underestimated. She couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Not just for Max, but for herself too. Because in that moment, Emily realized something important. Sometimes, it's not about what others think of you. It's about what you know to be true about yourself. And she had known all along that she was strong. She had known that she had something inside her that no one could take away. It didn't matter that she was blind. It didn't matter that people sometimes looked at her with pity or doubt. She had always had the power to stand up for herself. And with Max by her side, she was unstoppable. But that day had shown her something else too. It had shown her that sometimes the world needs a reminder. Sometimes, people need to see just how strong you really are. And when you show them, it's not just for you. It's for everyone who's ever been underestimated, ignored, or looked down upon. Emily had shown them that it's okay to stand up for yourself, to stand tall, and to be proud of who you are. And that was something worth sharing. As they reached the end of the block, Emily paused for a moment. She took a deep breath and looked around. She could sense the world around her. The sounds of the busy street, the faint murmur of voices from people passing by, the honk of a car in the distance. Everything felt alive and full of possibility. She wasn't just a blind woman anymore. She was Emily Dawson, the woman who had stood up to bullies and shown them the true meaning of strength. And no one would ever forget her. Max, sensing that she was pausing, looked up at her with those knowing eyes. He didn't need to speak. He didn't need to bark. He just stood there, silently by her side, offering his strength and his calm. And Emily knew, in that moment, that they had done something important. Something powerful. Together, they had shown the world what it meant to never back down, to never be afraid, and to never let anyone define who you are. They had shown the bikers what true strength looked like. And in doing so, they had set an example for everyone who had ever been told they couldn't do something because of who they were. Because of what they looked like, or what they couldn't do. Emily had never asked for pity. She had never wanted anyone to feel sorry for her. She had simply wanted to be treated like everyone else. And today, she had gotten that. She had gotten the respect she deserved, not because of her blindness, but because of the person she was. And Max had helped her show that. As they made their way down the street, Emily thought about the bikers. They had underestimated her. They had thought she was weak. They had thought that just because she was blind, she wouldn't be able to stand up for herself. They had thought they could make fun of her, push her around, and get away with it. But they had learned their lesson the hard way. And Emily smiled to herself. She knew they would never forget the lesson they had learned that day. They would never forget the day they had crossed paths with her and with Max. And that was a good thing. Sometimes, people need to be reminded of the power that lies in unexpected places. And maybe, just maybe, the bikers would think twice the next time they tried to mess with someone they didn't understand. But for Emily, this was more than just a victory over a group of bullies. It was about something deeper. It was about proving that everyone has value. That everyone has strength. That just because you don't look like someone else, or because you don't fit into someone else's idea of what you should be, doesn't mean you can't do amazing things. And sometimes, the people who are the most underestimated are the ones who end up making the biggest difference. As they walked together, Emily and Max, side by side, she felt a sense of peace. She knew that the world wasn't perfect. She knew there would always be challenges ahead. But she also knew that, with Max by her side, she could face anything. She had the strength to keep moving forward, to keep standing up for herself, and to keep showing the world that there was more to her than they could ever see. And that was a powerful thing. So, as Emily and Max disappeared down the street, their heads held high, the world had just learned a valuable lesson. Sometimes, the most underestimated people have the power to make a difference. Sometimes, the ones who are judged the hardest are the ones who are capable of the greatest things. And the ones who judge others? They're the ones who never see it coming. It was the day that Emily Dawson, with her loyal guide dog Max, had shown the world that strength isn't always what it seems. And that was a lesson that would stay with everyone who had witnessed it, long after the bikers had gone and the day had ended.